I want you to picture a scenario for a second. Have you ever achieved something truly great? Like maybe you landed a promotion, or you aced a massive presentation,
Right.
or you finally walked across the stage to get your degree, only to immediately look over your shoulder.
Oh, yeah. Like waiting for the other shoe to drop.
Exactly. You were just waiting, holding your breath for someone to walk up, tap you on the back, and
Yeah.
say, "Excuse me, we figured you out."
You made a mistake.
Right. You are a fraud. Please pack up your desk.
It is a remarkably common, incredibly heavy feeling, honestly. That sense of waiting for the facade to crumble, even when you happen to be the person who built the entire shoe factory from scratch.
Yeah. And that feeling is exactly the mission of this deep dive. We are exploring a really fascinating stack of clinical psychology texts, some existential philosophy papers, and modern behavioral therapy guides.
It's quite a mix.
It really is. And our goal is to understand the roots of that self-doubt, to look at the heavy realities of human existence, and most importantly, figure out how we can translate our deepest anxieties into authentic, value-driven action.
I love that.
And joining me for this is our resident expert, who, I have to say, is broadcasting from a studio that looks absolutely incredible today.
What?
It feels like you were sitting in a cozy, wood-paneled library that is somehow floating in the middle of these expansive, starry night sky charts.
Yeah, I thought the library meets cosmos aesthetic felt pretty appropriate today.
It totally works.
Thanks. I mean, we are bridging the daily, grounded grind of our internal thoughts with the ultimate vast questions of why we are even here.
Yeah.
You know?
Okay, let's unpack this. Let's start with that fraud feeling. The research labels this imposter syndrome.
Right.
And if you are listening to this thinking you are the only one who feels it, well, the data completely contradicts that. 70 to 80% of people experience imposter syndrome at some point in their life.
Which is just a massive number.
It is. It's a cognitive distortion where you believe your success is completely undeserved. And I was particularly struck by the mechanics of what the sources call the imposter cycle.
Yeah, the cycle is brutal.
It really is. You get faced with a task, you feel this rush of anxiety and self-doubt, and that pushes you down one of two extreme paths. You either procrastinate until the very last possible second, or you frantically over-prepare.
And the really insidious part of that cycle is what happens internally after you actually succeed at the task.
Right, because you usually do succeed.
Exactly. If you went down the path of over-preparation, you rationalize the victory by telling yourself that you only succeeded because you worked yourself to the absolute bone, not because you are actually intelligent or capable.
You just outworked everyone.
Right. On the flip side, if you procrastinated and still pulled it off, you convince yourself that you just got incredibly lucky this one time.
It was a fluke.
A total fluke. So in both scenarios, you completely fail to internalize the success. The cycle just, resets for the next task.
Wow. And Valerie Young, a researcher who spent years looking into this, breaks this down even further. Not all imposter feelings manifest in the same way, right? She outlines 5 distinct types of imposters.
She does, and looking at the underlying mechanisms for each is really revealing. First, you have the perfectionist.
Okay.
For this type, anything short of absolute flawless execution feels like a catastrophic failure. Even if a project is like 99% perfect, they fixate on the 1% they got wrong.
Which just validates their feeling of being a fraud.
Exactly. Second is the superhuman. This is the person who feels they must absolutely master every single role in their life. They have to be the perfect worker, the perfect parent, the perfect partner all simultaneously.
Man, that superhuman type really hits close to home for me.
Yeah.
Yeah, being the superhuman feels like a smartphone running way too many background apps at once. Like you look fine on the surface, but internally the processor's overheating, and eventually the battery just dies from burnout.
That is a perfect way to visualize it, yeah. The processor just fries.
Exactly. What's the third one?
The third type is the natural genius. Their imposter syndrome is triggered by effort. They judge their competence based on speed and ease.
Oh, so if it's hard, they feel dumb.
Right. If they have to struggle to learn a new skill, or if they don't get something right on the first try, they assume they are a fraud.
It's exhausting.
It is. Fourth is the soloist, who operates under the belief that asking for help is a definitive sign of weakness.
Interesting.
And finally, you have the expert, who feels they need to know absolutely every single piece of information about a subject before they even begin to speak or act.
But looking at all of this, I find myself wanting to push back a little on the premise here.
Okay, go for it.
Why are we striving so hard in the first place? Isn't some level of external motivation or even fear of failure actually necessary?
How do you mean?
I mean, I certainly wouldn't pay my taxes just for the sheer joy of it. We need some external pressure to get things done, don't we?
That pushback gets right to the heart of the matter. It leads us into a psychological framework called self-determination theory, or SDT, developed by Edward Deci and Richard Ryan.
Okay, what does STT say about that?
Well, SDT does not argue that external motivation is inherently bad or useless. Instead, it asks us to look at the quality of our motivation on a spectrum.
A spectrum from what to what?
On one far end, you have purely intrinsic motivation, doing something strictly because you find it inherently joyful or interesting. On the other far end, you have pure extrinsic motivation, doing something strictly for an external reward or to avoid a tangible punishment.
Like my example of paying taxes so I don't get sent to federal prison.
Exactly that. But the theory posits that for human beings to function optimally and to actually feel a sense of psychological well-being, we have three core psychological needs that must be met.
Which are?
The first is autonomy, which is the feeling that you are the author of your own actions, that you have a choice. The second is competence, the feeling that you are effective and mastering your environment.
Okay. Autonomy, competence. And the third?
And the third is relatedness, the fundamental need for meaningful social connections and belonging.
So how does that framework connect back to someone sitting at their desk at 2 a.m. feeling like a fraud?
What's fascinating here is how self-determination theory categorizes the nuanced flavors of extrinsic motivation. There is a very specific type of motivation on that spectrum called introjected regulation.
Introjected regulation.
Yes. This happens when you are driven to act not because you inherently want to and not because they aren't working late because they love the project, and they aren't working late because their boss explicitly threatened to fire them, which would be purely extrinsic.
So why are they doing it?
They are working late to avoid the crushing internal shame of being found out. Their motivation is entirely controlled by internal fear, which completely strips them of their sense of autonomy.
That is so dark, but it makes so much sense.
Yeah.
But, if we manage to strip away all those external pressures, all that introjected regulation and shame, and we could somehow look purely at what we intrinsically want.
Yeah.
I imagine it's not like everything suddenly becomes easy and joyful, because when you remove the structures telling you what to do, you are suddenly face to face with the sheer weight of being alive.
Absolutely.
Which brings Irvin Yalom's existential psychotherapy into the picture, based on our sources.
Right. Yalom's work shifts the lens dramatically here. He proposes that a vast amount of our psychological distress isn't just rooted in childhood trauma or maladaptive habit.
It's deeper than that.
Much deeper. A lot of our suffering comes from our direct confrontation with what he calls the four ultimate concerns of existence. These are the unavoidable givens of being a human being.
The sources list those four concerns as death, freedom, isolation, and meaninglessness. And I want to zero in on freedom for a second.
Sure.
Because the way Yalom talks about it really threw me. Wait, freedom makes us anxious. I always thought freedom was the ultimate goal, the thing everyone is fighting for.
It seems counterintuitive at first.
It really does. But reading his description, it is like staring at a massive, terrifyingly blank canvas with absolutely no instructions, no paint-by-numbers guides.
Just you and the canvas.
Right. You feel the sheer weight of being the sole author of your life, and there is no one else to blame if the painting turns out terrible.
In existential philosophy, that terrifying blank canvas is referred to as groundlessness.
Groundlessness. That sounds exactly like what it feels like.
It is the dizzying, vertigo-inducing realization that there is no grand cosmic blueprint for our choices. We are, as the philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre put it, condemned to be free.
Condemned to be free. That's heavy.
Very heavy. We crave structure and definitive answers, but the universe doesn't provide them. Because we have no solid ground beneath us, we desperately try to build illusions of structure to feel safe.
Oh, so we join really rigid organizations, or we just blindly copy whatever our neighbors are doing so we don't have to make the hard choices ourselves.
Exactly.
We run away from our own freedom.
We absolutely flee from it. And we also flee from the third concern, isolation. Yalom breaks isolation down into three distinct layers, and understanding the difference is really crucial.
Break those down for me.
First, there is interpersonal isolation, which is just everyday loneliness, being physically or emotionally separated from other people.
That's the one we usually think of.
Right. Then there is interpersonal isolation, where we actually cut off parts of ourselves.
Like repressing things.
Exactly. We might repress our anger, our vulnerability, or our creativity because we were taught early on that those parts of us were unacceptable.
Right.
But the most profound layer is existential isolation.
The unbridgeable gap. I remember that phrase.
Yeah, the unbridgeable gap. The reality that no matter how intimately you love someone, no matter how much you share your life with a partner or a friend, you are ultimately trapped inside your own consciousness.
And they are trapped in theirs.
Right. You enter the world alone and you leave it alone. No one can ever truly experience your subjective reality.
But wait, I have to say, I don't walk around consciously terrified of death and existential isolation every day.
Most people don't.
I mean, I'm mostly terrified of things like public speaking or failing a project or getting rejected. How does Yellum connect those mundane, everyday anxieties to the big, heavy concern of death?
Well, the human mind is incredibly adept at displacement. It finds it much easier to focus on a manageable, specific fear than the overwhelming, terrifying reality of our own eventual non-existence.
Okay, so give me an example of how that works.
So someone might develop a severe paralyzing fear of flying. They can avoid airplanes. They can control whether they buy a ticket. It gives them an illusion of control over their mortality.
I see. So the fear of flying is just displaced death anxiety.
Often, yes. But Yalomar argues that we actually have to gently confront this underlying mortality to live fully. And he offers a concept that serves as a remarkably comforting antidote to death anxiety, which he calls rippling.
Rippling, like dropping a stone in a pond and watching the water move outward.
Exactly like that. Rippling is the profound realization that our influence on others does not end when our biological life ends.
How so?
It spreads outward, touching people we may never even meet. A teacher helps a struggling student who grows up to be a patient and kind parent, who raises a compassionate doctor, and so on.
Wow.
Recognizing your ripples allows you to see yourself as part of a much larger, ongoing web of human connection that continues long after your individual consciousness is gone.
That is an incredibly beautiful way to reframe it. But still, consciously facing these four concerns, death, freedom, isolation, meaninglessness, is objectively terrifying.
Oh, without a doubt.
It is entirely understandable why our brains naturally try to hide from them, right? We build up those illusions of structure and develop introjected regulation to keep us distracted.
We do whatever we can to avoid the dread.
But what is the psychological cost of all that hiding?
The cost is steep, and it introduces a very heavy philosophical concept, existential guilt. We can look to the German philosopher Martin Heidegger to understand this.
Okay, what does Heidegger say about guilt?
For Heidegger, existential guilt has nothing to do with doing something legally or morally wrong, like stealing or lying.
Okay.
It is the fundamental guilt of owing a responsibility to our own potential. He uses a concept called thrownness, which means every single one of us is dropped into circumstances we did not choose.
We didn't choose our historical era, our family of origin, our socioeconomic status, or our physical bodies.
Exactly. All of that is our thrownness.
So we are just thrown onto the stage halfway through the play, and we are expected to start acting without a script.
That's a great analogy, but we still have to act. We still have to make choices. The danger lies in what Heidegger calls falling into das Man.
Das Man.
Yes. It translates roughly to the they or the one. It represents the anonymous, comforting, but deeply alienating conformity of society.
Doing what everyone else does.
Right. When you just do what one does, one goes to a good college, one gets a safe corporate job, one buys a house with a 2-car garage, you are letting Das Man dictate your existence.
You're just following the script that society handed you.
Exactly. So existential guilt is the internal call from your conscience, pulling you back from that conformity, demanding that you take ownership of your specific thrown circumstances.
Okay, so the psychologist Rolla May takes this heavy philosophical idea and makes it highly practical for the therapy room.
He does.
For May, existential guilt acts as an inner warning system. It is an alarm bell ringing inside your head to tell you that you are locking away your true potential.
It's the deep, aching pain of the unlived life inside you.
The unlived life. And May points out that we don't just owe this responsibility to ourselves, right? We are failing our responsibilities to our relationships, what he calls our Mitwelt, and to our physical environment, our Umwelt.
May's psychological adaptation is very pragmatic here.
How does it manifest?
Well, if you repress your potential, if you refuse to engage authentically with your Mitwelt, Perhaps by treating your friends and colleagues just as networking opportunities rather than human beings.
Oh, yeah, we all know people like that.
Right. Or if you ignore your unwelt by treating your physical body like a machine to be exploited for work, that unused, neglected life turns into neurotic symptoms.
It turns into anxiety, depression, and imposter syndrome.
Exactly.
Here's where it gets really interesting for me. If we look at human development, specifically Erickson's theories on identity, we see that building a healthy identity requires a period of deep exploration where you actively question the values you were handed.
That's the healthy path, yes.
But the alternative is identity foreclosure, where you just blindly accept the roles handed to you by your parents or society.
That sounds exactly like falling into Heidegger's Das Man.
It is exactly that. It's the psychological equivalent.
But I have to push back on our modern culture for a second because the rules have changed, haven't they?
In what way?
We are constantly bombarded with messages to optimize our lives, to hustle, to be the best version of yourself. Is this modern obsession with perfectionism and relentless self-improvement actually just a sneaky 21st century way of falling into Das Man?
Oh, that's a brilliant connection.
Because aren't we just conforming to a toxic productivity culture while slapping the label of self-actualization on it?
The critical analysis in the existential literature strongly supports that view. Neoliberal ideals and strict time management paradigms actually objectify our finite time on Earth.
We treat it like a resource to be maximized. Exactly. We start treating our lives like a corporate balance sheet that needs to be maximized for ultimate efficiency. When you try to design a perfect trajectory of personal growth, you are essentially trying to close off choices and eliminate all ambiguity.
Which means you lose the authentic, messy, unscripted reality of being a human being.
You do. You aren't actually exploring your potential. You are just fulfilling a modern, socially prescribed mandate to be relentlessly productive. It is absolutely a new, highly deceptive dialect of Das Man.
Wow. Okay, so to recap where we are at. We are drowning in the blank canvas of our own freedom.
Yep.
We are burdened by the heavy guilt of our unlived potential, and we are constantly fighting the urge to conform to a culture that wants to optimize our souls into a spreadsheet.
Sounds pretty bleak when you put it like that.
It really does. How do we practically live with this reality without just shutting down, crawling under the covers, and giving up?
That is the pivotal question, and it brings us to a modern therapeutic framework called acceptance and commitment therapy, or ACT.
I love the ACT portion of this deep dive because it is so deeply actionable. From what I understand, ACT operates on a very different premise than traditional cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT.
It's very different, yeah.
CBT often focuses on challenging, reframing, or changing your painful thoughts. But ACT takes a different route entirely. It essentially says pain is inevitable.
You cannot positive think your way out of the human condition or the anxiety of existence.
So what does ACT focus on instead?
ACT focuses on building what it calls psychological flexibility. It acknowledges right out of the gate that painful thoughts, imposter syndrome, and existential dread are going to arise.
It's just part of being human.
Exactly. But it posits that experiential avoidance, our frantic, exhausting attempts to run away from, suppress, or numb that pain, is actually the root cause of our long-term suffering.
So instead of running from the pain, we have to clarify what we actually care about. There is a crucial distinction in the methodology between a goal and a value. A goal is like climbing a specific mountain peak. You set your sights on it, you climb it, you cross it off the list, and it is done.
You achieved it.
But a value is like walking west. You can never finish walking west. You can always keep going in that direction no matter where you are.
It's a continuous process.
But how do we actually put that into practice when our brain is screaming at us that we are a fraud?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, ACT utilizes a core technique called diffusion, meaning you unfuse yourself from your thoughts.
Unfuse. Okay, give me a practical example.
Let's say you are about to give a presentation, and your brain offers up the thought, I am a total fraud and everyone in this room is going to find out.
A very common thought.
Very common. Instead of fighting that thought, arguing with it, or believing it as the absolute truth, you simply observe it. You might use a visualization technique, like imagining taking that sentence, attaching it to a fluffy white cloud, and just watching it float across the sky of your mind.
You just let it float by.
You do not judge it. You just let it exist.
You create a buffer of distance between you and the thought.
You do. And once you have established that distance, you can create an action plan. You set SMART goal-specific, measurable, action-oriented, realistic, time-specific that serve your intrinsic westward walking values.
But the essential key here is that you willingly and consciously make room for the uncomfortable thoughts that will inevitably arise along the journey.
Exactly. You don't tell yourself, I will finally ask for a promotion once my imposter syndrome goes away.
Because it might never go away.
Right. Instead, you say, I value my career growth and providing for my family, so I will ask for the promotion and I will bring my imposter syndrome along for the ride in the passenger seat.
That is a great way to frame it. So what does this all mean for you, the listener? We have gone on quite an intense journey today.
We covered a lot of ground.
We really did. We started by looking at the exhausting mechanics of imposter syndrome and understanding that our deepest psychological needs are autonomy, competence, and relatedness. We faced the terrifying blank canvas of our freedom, the inevitability of our own death, and the existential guilt of the unlived life that is screaming inside us to be realized.
It's a lot to process.
It is. And finally, we looked at how to use acceptance and commitment therapy to unhook from those fears and walk steadily toward our values, even when the anxiety in our head is overwhelmingly loud.
It requires a profound shift in perspective to live this way. But before we wrap up, there is one final, deeply surprising insight from the research that we haven't touched on yet, and it flips this entire narrative about self-doubt completely on its head.
Oh, the MIT study. This completely changed how I view the imposter cycle.
Yeah, research conducted by Basima Tufik at MIT reveals that imposter syndrome actually carries a hidden superpower.
A superpower.
Her studies demonstrate that leaning into your imposter thoughts, rather than fighting them, hiding from them, or trying to optimize them away, actually makes you significantly more other-oriented.
Meaning you start paying much closer attention to the people around you instead of just focusing on your own performance.
Precisely. Because you feel a bit unsure of yourself and your own footing, you naturally become highly attuned to other people's feelings, perceptions, and needs.
You ask better questions.
To check in for understanding. This significantly boosts your interpersonal effectiveness. It makes you a far better listener, a more empathetic collaborator, and frankly, it just makes you a more likable human being to be around.
That is such a wild, beautiful paradox. So I want to leave you with this thought to mull over as you go about your day. The very self-doubt that makes you feel like you don't belong in the room, the very anxiety that makes you wait for that dreaded tap on the shoulder, that might be the exact fuel you need to connect deeply and authentically with the people around you.
It's a powerful realization.
It really is. You aren't a fraud. You are just a human being experiencing the profound dizziness of freedom, doing the best you can to walk west. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. See you next time.